They didn't forget to invite me to my sister's graduation party. They chose not to. I found out the same way I found out about most things in my family by accident. My mother had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to answer the door. And the screen lit up with a message from my aunt that read, "So excited for Danielle's party Saturday, what should I bring?" It was Tuesday. No one had mentioned a party to me. I stood there for a moment, holding my coffee mug with both hands, reading that sentence 3 times. Then I set the mug down very carefully, the way you do when you're trying not to break something. And I walked back to my room. I didn't say anything. I never said anything. That was the role I had been trained into since I was old enough to understand that there were 2 kinds of children in my house, the one who was celebrated and the one who kept things running. My sister Danielle was graduating from a local community college with a degree in communications. It had taken her 5 years. During those 5 years, I had quietly paid for 2 of her semesters when my parents ran short, covered her car insurance for 14 months, and driven her to campus on mornings when she claimed her anxiety was too bad to drive. I had done all of this without being asked twice. Because in my family, being useful was the closest thing to being loved. I was 31. I worked as a hospital pharmacist at a regional medical center in Phoenix. A job I had put myself through school for while living with 2 roommates and eating a lot of rice and beans. I had my own apartment now. A modest one, but mine. I had a savings account that I protected quietly, and a boyfriend named Marcus, who had been patient with me in ways I was still learning to accept. What Marcus did for work was something I had kept mostly private from my family. Not because I was ashamed, but because I had watched enough of their behavior to know that information in my family only traveled in one direction toward whatever served them best. Marcus ran a private equity firm he had built from scratch over the past 12 years. He was thoughtful and soft-spoken, and wore the same brand of plain white t-shirts in bulk. He was also, by any reasonable measure, extraordinarily wealthy. My mother had met him once at a birthday dinner I'd invited her to. She had been polite. She had never asked about him again. I told Marcus about the party that evening. We were sitting on my couch, and I showed him the text I had seen on my mother's phone, the way you show someone evidence of something you're not quite sure you actually witnessed. He read it. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" That was the question no one in my family had ever thought to ask me. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the 14 months of car insurance. I thought about the 2 semesters. I thought about every holiday I had shown up to with food I made from scratch and left feeling like a guest who had overstayed. I thought about my sister's face at Christmas last year when my parents gave her a weekend trip to San Diego and gave me a candle set from a drugstore clearance bin, and how I had smiled and said thank you, because that was what I always did. Then I thought about the fact that Marcus had been talking for months about going to Italy. Specifically, to a villa outside Florence that a friend of his had offered us for 2 weeks in June. I had kept putting it off because June was when Danielle's graduation was, and I had assumed, without anyone confirming it, that I would be expected to help plan whatever celebration came after. I looked at Marcus and said, "I think I want to go to Florence." He smiled. He had been waiting for me to say that for a long time. We booked the flights the next morning. Business class. Because Marcus had long since stopped pretending that was an extravagance. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I watched the confirmation email arrive in my inbox. And I felt something I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't quite happiness. It was more like the feeling of setting down something heavy that you had been carrying so long. You forgot it had weight. I did not tell my family I was going. Not because I was planning anything I wasn't, but because no one asked. That was the thing about being invisible. It works in both directions. The week before we left, my mother called me. I assumed it was about the party. I was wrong. "Your father's back is acting up again," she said. "We need you to come look at his medication and figure out why it's not working." My father had a prescription for a muscle relaxant that he took incorrectly because he refused to read the instructions. I had explained this to him 4 times. I had written it down on a note card and taped it to the medicine cabinet. The note card was still there. He had simply chosen not to follow it. "Mom," I said. "I've explained the dosage schedule multiple times. It's on the note card in the cabinet." "Well, it would just be easier if you came. I'm actually leaving for a trip on Friday." There was a pause. A trip where Italy. Another pause. Longer. Italy. With who? With Marcus. Oh. The way she said it, like the word had no particular weight. Like Marcus was a vague acquaintance I occasionally mentioned. "Well? How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks. "That's a long time." "It is." She did not ask if I was excited. She did not ask where in Italy. She circled back to my father's medication twice more before she got off the phone. She never mentioned the party. She never mentioned Danielle's graduation. She never said, "We'd love for you to be there." Or, "Are you free that weekend?" Or anything that would have required acknowledging that I existed in a way that extended beyond what I could provide. I hung up and I finished packing. Florence in June is something I don't have adequate words for. The villa was 40 minutes outside the city, tucked into a hillside with cypress trees on one side and a view of the valley on the other. The kitchen had terracotta floors and a long wooden table, and Marcus made coffee every morning in a stovetop pot he'd bought at a market on our second day. We drove into the city and walked until our feet gave out. We ate pasta at a place with no English menu and pointed at things and were never disappointed. We went to the Uffizi and stood in front of paintings that had been waiting 600 years for someone to look at them. I did not think about my family very much. That was the first time that had ever been true on a vacation. And I noticed it the way you notice the absence of a noise that's been constant for so long you'd stopped hearing it. On the 5th day, Marcus suggested we take a drive through the Tuscan countryside. We stopped at a vineyard that was technically not open for tours, but whose owner recognized Marcus from some conference or another and invited us in anyway. We spent 3 hours there. We tasted wine in a stone cellar that was older than the United States, and the owner's wife brought out bread and olive oil and didn't charge us for any of it. At some point during that afternoon, sitting at a table in that cellar, with a glass of Chianti and the sound of nothing but wind and distant bells, I started to cry. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The way water moves through a crack in stone. Marcus didn't make a production of it. He just moved his chair closer to mine. "What is it?" he asked. "I think I've been really sad for a long time," I said. And I didn't know it because I was always too busy to notice. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed close. That was enough. What happened back in Phoenix while we were in Florence? I learned about in pieces afterward. My cousin Raina, who is the one member of my extended family I actually trust, texted me on day 6 with a message that said, "Girl, you need to call me when you land." A lot happened. I waited until we were back before I called her. We were sitting in the airport in Rome, waiting for our connection, and I stepped away from Marcus and found a corner near a charging station and called Raina from my phone. She took a breath and started from the beginning. Danielle's graduation party had been held at my parents' house. As planned, about 30 people attended, family, neighbors, some of Danielle's friends. What no one had known, including my parents, was that Danielle had been quietly inflating her credentials for years. Her LinkedIn profile listed a marketing internship at a mid-size Phoenix company called Veritas Group. She had put it on her profile before she was even accepted as an intern and had never been officially hired. She had attended 2 unpaid orientation sessions and then stopped showing up. The problem was that one of the people my mother had invited to the graduation party was a family friend named Carol, who happened to be the HR director at Veritas Group. According to Raina, Carol had pulled my mother aside within the first hour of the party to ask, in genuine confusion, why Danielle was listing Veritas Group as a professional reference when she had never actually completed an internship there and had In fact, I've been asked not to return after missing her third orientation session without notice. My mother had not known. My father had not known. The only people who had known were Danielle and, apparently, one of Danielle's friends who had helped her write the LinkedIn bio. How bad was it, I asked. Raina made a sound. Your mom cried. In the kitchen, in front of like 4 people. Your dad didn't say anything for most of the rest of the party. Danielle left early with her friends and hasn't really talked to your parents since. And then, she paused. Then your aunt asked where you were. And your mom said you were traveling. And your aunt said, you didn't invite her? Did you? And your mom said you were busy. And your aunt said, what did she say? She said, she's always been too good for the way this family treats her. I sat with that for a moment. A gate announcement came over the intercom in Italian and then English. Your mom called you that night. Raina continued. Did you get the voicemail? I had gotten a voicemail. I had seen it come in at 11:47 p.m. Phoenix time, and I had looked at it and thought, I'll listen to it when I'm ready. And I had set my phone down and gone back to the book I was reading. I'll listen to it eventually. I said. She sounded bad. Raina said. Not unkindly. Just accurately. The voicemail was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. I know because I looked at the timestamp before I listened to it. Standing in my own apartment 2 days after we got back from Italy. On a Tuesday morning, with Marcus in the kitchen making eggs. My mother's voice on the recording was uneven in a way I had not heard before. She said she hadn't realized how much I did. She said she thought I knew I was always welcome. She said things had gotten complicated with Danielle, and she didn't know how to fix them. She said she missed me. She did not apologize for the party. Not directly. She came close to it. The way you come close to an exit ramp and then keep driving. But she never quite stopped. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the whole thing. Then I set the phone down on the nightstand. Marcus appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs. He handed me one and sat down next to me without asking how it went. He'd known me long enough to read the answer in my shoulders. What are you going to do? He asked. It was the same question he had asked me on the couch that night months ago. When I'd shown him the text message about the party. The same question no one else had ever thought to ask. I wrapped both hands around the mug. The coffee was hot and the apartment was quiet, and outside the window, the Phoenix morning was already turning gold. I'm going to take some time, I said, and figure out what I actually want, not what's expected of me. That was new. Saying that out loud? Claiming it as a complete thought, not apologizing for it at the end. It had taken me 31 years and a Tuscan hillside and a 4-minute voicemail to arrive at it. But I was here. I had spent most of my adult life being the person who kept the wheels turning. The one who covered the semesters and the car insurance and the medication confusion and the last-minute favors. The one who showed up with homemade food to parties she wasn't celebrated at. I had believed, somewhere deep and untested, that if I was useful enough, consistent enough, quiet enough, eventually, the love I was providing would be reflected back. It wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. Maybe ever. And the saddest part wasn't the betrayal, it was realizing that I had already known and had kept showing up anyway, because that was easier than acknowledging what the absence meant. My aunt's words had reached me in that airport in Rome and lodged somewhere I couldn't shake them loose from. She's always been too good for the way this family treats her. Not because I needed someone else to validate it, but because hearing it said plainly, by someone who had watched it happen for 30 years, made it real in a way I had been avoiding. I called my mother back 3 days later. The conversation was quiet and careful on both sides. I told her I loved her. Because that was true. I told her I needed her to understand that love wasn't only something I dispensed in practical forms: money, rides, pharmaceutical advice, and that I needed to receive it in ways I could actually feel. I told her that Florence had been extraordinary, and that Marcus and I were happy. and that I hoped she would take the time to ask me about my life the way she asked Danielle about hers. She cried a little. She said she wanted to do better. I believed her. Cautiously. The way you believe a weather forecast, aware that conditions could change, Danielle texted me 2 weeks later. It was a long message. Longer than she had ever sent me before. And it was not easy to write. I could tell by the way it kept starting and stopping and circling back. She said she knew she had taken me for granted. She said the situation with the internship had made her look at a lot of things she hadn't wanted to look at. She said she was sorry. I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit for a few days. Not out of cruelty, but because I wanted to answer from a place of clarity rather than old habit. When I did respond, I kept it short. I told her I appreciated her saying so. I told her I was open to rebuilding things slowly. If she was willing to do the work that actually required, I did not promise anything I wasn't sure I could deliver. That was new too. Marcus and I got engaged on a Tuesday evening in October. At home, in the kitchen, with no fanfare at all. He had asked me what kind of proposal I wanted, and I had told him the truth that I wanted something private. Something that was ours before it was anyone else's. So he came home with takeout from the Thai place we ordered from approximately once a week. And somewhere between the Pad See and the second episode of whatever we were watching at the time, he reached into his jacket pocket and put a ring on the table between us and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. If you want that too?" I looked at him for a moment. Then I said yes. We told our families the following weekend. My mother cried. Genuinely and warmly. And for the first time in recent memory, the tears felt like they were for me. She asked about the ring. She asked where we were thinking for the wedding. She asked if she could help with anything. Small things. Maybe. But I was learning to receive small things without dismissing them. My aunt called me that evening. The one who had said those words at the party. And she said, "I always knew you'd end up exactly where you deserved to be." I thanked her. Then I sat with it quietly for a moment. The way you sit with something that is true and has been true for a long time, but that you're only now allowing yourself to fully believe. I deserve to be here. In this apartment. With this man. With this ring on my finger and a Tuscan hillside in my recent memory, and a future that felt, for the first time, like something I had chosen, rather than something I was waiting for permission to want. The chair at the table that had always felt like charity, I wasn't sitting in it anymore. I had walked away from it quietly. Without a speech. Without an ultimatum. Without the confrontation that everyone in these situations is always supposed to have. I had simply gotten on a plane to Florence and let the distance do what I never could. And on a Tuesday evening in October, in a kitchen that was mine, eating Thai food that I had paid for with a paycheck I had earned, saying yes to a man who had never once made me justify my presence, I understood finally what it felt like to have a seat that was actually mine. Not given. Not conditional. Not earned through usefulness or silence or years of overlooked sacrifice. Just mine.